Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite again. It's actually my great pleasure to be here and catch up with quite a few people who I've not seen for many years, and certainly some of my great mentors around the place. So it's lovely to be here, and thank you very much. So, ANSPA, who are ANSPA? Sorry, I'll cut straight to the acronym. The Australia New Zealand Police Advisory Agency. It's sort of in the name. We give advice to police across Australia and New Zealand, and that includes research and policy and protocols and all that kind of thing. And just listening to this morning's speakers makes me realise how much we reference your work on a very regular basis, and how much we rely on you for some of the research that you do. I think everything that we've been talking about this morning intersects across everything I'm going to talk about in the next 45 minutes. So, yes, strategic thinking, planning, and more in demand, I guess, for one of our products at the moment is very much around foresight and what's coming next. Policing agencies are struggling with resourcing and how they can possibly spread the thin resources that they do have to best effect, and therefore trying to get a handle on what is coming, not just next week, but a bit further down the road, to inform planning, to inform strategy, is something that they're asking us to do an awful lot more of. So if you think of your strategic foresight, it should be about 5 years out. That wafts in and out depending on the pace of change a little bit. And if your foresight's any good, it should be sounding absolutely ludicrous. So if some of the things I say sound ludicrous, that's my excuse, and I'm going to stick it in there right now. So, but there's no point in looking at foresight if you're not going to look at what you can do in relation to that and how you can take some action. So I promise we will get to that. And I think we probably deal with as many revolting, nasty and unpleasant things as the AI see. So I apologise in advance if I am also totally depressing and looking at the grim side of life in most of the things that I'm talking about. Not much of it is upbeat and making us feel optimistic about our futures, but I will see if we can keep the tone fairly lively, especially straight after lunch. You'll see there our Futures and Strategic Foresight Toolkit. We've developed that to try and help jurisdictions think through some of these things themselves. There's a heap of tools in there, and it's available to anybody that's got any interest, and we're more than happy to run you through how to best use it. Okay, so ANSPA a little while ago developed a heap of megatrends, and I'm not going to drag through each and every one of them, but I think what's interesting about the megatrends is that some of them, even since they were first developed, which is only about 2 years ago max now, some of them have developed at a pace that we probably would never have expected. Others are lagging a little bit behind, but others are almost not foresight now as here and now. So I think COVID and some of the changes that it brought upon us have absolutely expedited some of the changes that we thought were going to be coming, and probably slowed some others down. But when we're looking at megatrends, we're looking at the things that are impacting on police long term, and it's not just police; it's law enforcement and government more generally. But obviously, my job being as it is, I'm focusing more across police and the justice system. So, one of the first things that we kind of look to is what's happening with our population growth. How is that going to impact us? And with growth in population also at the moment, we are really noticing that we are looking at a massive growth in use of the internet and access to internet and everything that comes with that. 3.5 billion new users are estimated between now and 2030. Now, that's not spectacular in its own sort of right until you start looking at where your growth of populations are coming from. So we're looking at probably a backward step in Europe, so that it's dropping off a little bit there as opposed to having 100% saturation. But if you look at where we've got 25% growth, and where it's estimated that they will all then start having access to the internet, is in our African nations, and Nigeria in particular. And so there's no, Anthony, when you talked about your cybercrime, I'm not linking making the big link, but if you've got that growth in your users and you've got a population surge, which they are saying that by 2050 is going to be bigger than the USA, so Nigeria and Africa bigger than the USA by 2050. And given that they are countries that are scarcely managing to support themselves in terms of resources now, it does raise eyebrows. Bless you. It does raise eyebrows in relation to what that's going to mean in terms of not just legitimate use of the internet and informing people about what is available elsewhere in the world, but also for potential for growth of abuse, misuse, and criminal activity in the cyber world. So that's something that we are kind of incredibly conscious of, because what is that going to do in terms of migration and people seeing that there are other options around the world for them to either make money or to, in fact, look towards migration. And it's all, of course, part of what is being well and truly touted around as the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure this audience doesn't need reminding of what the first three industrial revolutions were all about. But the fourth industrial revolution is the growth, if you like, in computing grunt that we are seeing has certainly exploded. It was interesting watching the first 50 years of the AIC and realising how quickly so many technologies have come and gone in that 50 years. You know, there's so many things that we've probably all used that have now been, they're dead and buried, and you find them and you go looking through your loft, because they've been done their time within that 50 years. But the growth and the rate of explosion at the moment in terms of our use of AI, blockchain, so many other things, are just growing exponentially. And I think people have even stopped questioning whether it is the fourth industrial revolution anymore. So what does this mean for us in policing and in law enforcement? There's already been a lot of conversations this morning about data and the use of data, and we are looking at the exponential growth of data and how in law enforcement we manage that. If you think about when you go to Harvey Norman or JB Hi-Fi or whatever, and you buy, for about 100 bucks, a terabyte of on one of those little things. So a terabyte, I'll get this wrong, but anyway, a zettabyte is a billion terabytes. So you think of a billion of them little things that you can get from JB Hi-Fi is one zettabyte, right? So in 2010, we had 2 zettabytes of data worldwide. By 2030, we're looking at 700 zettabytes produced. Now, when you start looking at that from a law enforcement point of view, and you start looking at failures of intelligence and why didn't we see this happening, and of course this has all been all over the news for the last week or so, why did we not see what was going to happen with invasions? Why was this police officer behaving like this? How is this not being picked up in his behaviour in the past on his body-worn camera or her body-worn camera? We are criticised all the time in terms of our intelligence failures, in terms of our knowledge gaps around what we've not picked up from the data that's already available. You imagine the growth of this and how we are going to be able to manage trawling through this amount of evidence and data that is going to be available to us when we're struggling so much now. And of course, this is where we have to start thinking a bit smarter and how we can rely on partnerships and AI and these things to actually start helping us do some of this stuff, because it is exponential growth, and we are poorly equipped at the moment to manage the amount of data that we've got, let alone what this is going to do to us. When you think about how cheap it is, for what was in 2010 a full mammoth millions worth of dollars of computer, the same computing grunt now is in an Xbox. It has grown a lot in a very short period of time. So we know, we've already touched on the whole cybercrime, cybersecurity. I won't talk too much more about it, but we are experiencing a whole range of things, and we are constantly being asked at ANSPA, where should we be headed with this? What AI should we be adopting? What's too risky? What's okay? Where does the community sentiment sit in relation to the use of AI, and where should we be going with it? And we're doing a heap of work at the moment about principles around responsible use of AI and trying to guide our police about what the community expect, what the community expectations are, and where it can go in the future. Because there's some schools of thought are going, well, we shouldn't be using it, we're not going to go near it. And then I think there's the inevitable, which is saying you've got no choice, you're going to have to harness it, but it's doing it in a way that retains community trust and doesn't expose police for misuse and abuse of AI in a way that's going to make the community feel like they're vulnerable or being abused. So we have all sorts of cybercrime, which Anthony has already touched on. I'm not going to reiterate some of the things because it is incredibly depressing. And having had my card scanned last week, I'm just one of those many numbers. But, we have got no idea of the scale of it, to be honest. I think you've probably got a good handle on what's going on in Australia, but if you talk to Microsoft, they are talking like 0.3 of cybercrime worldwide is currently being reported, which, if it was someone doing a bank job for $500,000 would be frontline news. This is what's going on every day, and I've certainly got personal experiences, I'm sure you all have, of people not reporting it because they don't think it's worthwhile or they don't think anything will happen about it. So some of the other technologies that are flagging up to us at the moment that we really need to be getting on the front foot are obviously AI officers. Dubai has got its first all AI police station, as only Dubai can. They're already ahead of it there. Apparently it's not working too well. The police robots at the bottom there, they were let loose. There was a digi-dog got let loose in New York first, but that got its head ripped off within the first 30 minutes that it was out on patrol. And the robots at the bottom there, meant to be there to report issues and crime and things too. Unfortunately, that particular lady's trying to report a crime, and all it did was spin round 3 times and sing a song back to her. So there's still a work in progress, I think it would be worth saying. But, you look at that image at the bottom there, that is fake identity. Whether we wish or not that was the case, that it's Trump being arrested, I won't comment on what my thoughts about that are. But fake IDs, deep fakes are going to create really big issues for policing. Trying to work through what are particularly malicious deepfake IDs around all sorts of blackmail issues, people claiming to be who they are not, in effect, and for police to be able to, and law enforcement to be able to authenticate deepfake IDs for so many reasons, it's just incredibly difficult. And we were talking to forensic experts around foresight and things just a couple of weeks ago, and you put some of this in the forensic world and you start thinking about fingerprints, facial recognition, handwriting. How many handwriting experts are going to be out of jobs? Yet there's still more handwriting experts than digital experts in this country at the moment. So a lot of retraining, a lot of rethinking about what job roles within policing and broader forensic science are going to look like even now, let alone 5 years down the track. So they all started scratching their heads and getting a little bit worried about, oh, blimey, our workforce perhaps isn't quite where we need it to be. So ChatGPT, I don't know how many of you have used a lot of ChatGPT. We're now looking at issues around where if people in police environments are using ChatGPT, is it also mining their computers that they're using at work, and what is that going to start bringing up as it delves into their systems? And so people are kind of freaking out about ChatGPT. But as a little precursor to coming here today, I just asked ChatGPT what are the wild cards in relation to things coming over the hill for law enforcement over the next 10 years. ChatGPT, what do you think? So they came up with, I'll give you the titles only because see what you think. Pandemic resurgence, massive cybersecurity breach, space-based crime, natural disaster escalation, biological terrorism, mass migration crisis, emergence of new political movements, breakthrough of mind control technology, rogue AI, and global economic collapse. That was about 3 seconds worth. So I thought, okay, I might as well go home. I think I'll just join the retired people and pack in. Now, that took 3 seconds to kick out. Now, obviously, everything that you put through these systems needs to be validated and checked and all the rest of it, but incredibly powerful. And obviously, there is some really good uses for it. They're looking already at being able to escalate a lot of the systems that we currently use, in particular around translation and things like that. But it's also brings with it opportunities for criminal activity. So one to be mindful of. So we're talking about scammers, we're talking about deep fake, and I particularly like this one. And we did talk a little bit about awareness raising and how to educate people and bring up to awareness the amount of fakes and things that there are, because none of us like to think that we're being scammed. I think we all like to think that we're smarter than that and better than that. And this particular awareness, I thought after lunch that this might be, something to liven us up a little bit with. This was an awareness campaign from New Zealand. I particularly like it. Some of you have probably seen it, but I think it's quite funny. So this is Albie, and this is who Albie's pretending to be. So if they can play it for me.
Hey fam, is Sarah home?
She's upstairs. Sorry, who are you?
I'm Albert, at Albio7 on Insta. Sarah and I are buddies online.
How old are you?
Me, 13. Just joined TikTok as well. It's fire.
So, what school do you go to?
Boys high. Hey Sarah, it's me, Albie, in real life. Lit, huh? I've been practicing that dance we were talking about.
You're Albie.
Yeah. Oh. So good fun to meet you in person, eh?
Okay, Deb, you know what this is and you know how to deal with it. Okay, Sarah, I'm not mad, but you and I have to have a bit of a chat about talking to strangers online. Oh, Albie, you're not invited. I'm calling the police.
Sorry, I thought it might liven things up after lunch a little bit. But, to me, it's about, and the point of that really is about getting on the front foot in relation to awareness, because there is no way that we've got the capacity to actually investigate everything that we're looking at. And there has to be this level of really high self-awareness to try to prevent, because policing just can't manage to deal effectively with the scope of things that's coming our way through the online misuse for all of the areas that you guys are already researching around child exploitation and cybercrime and everything else that's going around it. Quantum computing, of course, takes things to the next level, and the latest kind of thinking around quantum computing is that we are within 5 years of quantum computing being absolutely market ready, available, and on the front foot. Now, this is incredibly scary for all of us, because I'm not sure how many of you are aware about how quantum computing works, but it's a totally different computing capacity. So instead of ones and zeros being binary and flooding through really quickly, this looks at itself simultaneously. So in other words, the computing power of quantum computing is massively more effective than our standard computing that we know now, and with that will come incredible capacity. They're saying that they'd been looking for the cure or the jab, the antidote, if you like, for COVID. They could have got to that within about a day and a half instead of the time that it took by using quantum computing. There are some really, really good uses that we believe, in terms of medicine and health and managing to get medicines to market and things like that. The testing will be phenomenally quicker, but of course there is always some downsides about how this might be used against us. It will encrypt every encryption that we've currently got in place. So the US, the White House, are already investing massive amounts of money about how they can encrypt the encryptor in terms of the quantum computing. IBM and Google are our big leaders in this at the moment, and they're already getting online packages available. If you Google it, you can buy an online package for $20.24 or something like that. So you'll be able to get the quantum computing. It will probably destabilise and probably bring the end to many of the technologies that we already use, because it can simply decrypt them really quickly or get there so much quicker. So if we're investing 20% or more of our budgets at the moment in our computing capacity, what does that mean when a lot of that is going to be obsolete within 5 to 7 years? because quantum computing will take it over. Blockchain and lots of these other things that we rely on now will become pretty much obsolete. But it is said that, it's going to be incredibly powerful in terms of, again, our forensic science capacity, DNA turnaround, and managing massive traffic flow issues and logistics are some of the advantages that they're saying it's going to bring for us. But of course, if it's in the wrong hands, then obviously that's going to cause us a huge amount of problems. It's I always think that the James Bond movies were exactly probably some of the best foresight things that we've ever seen, and you've got to wonder whether or not Fleming was in actual fact the best strategist that any of us, or foresight and strategist person that any of us have ever seen, because so many of the things that they sort of predicted, or what was bringing along the world downfall, are now kind of starting to emerge as realities. We're already seeing in Kenya water shortages are such that the black market have captured water supplies and are selling it on the black market for like 20 times the value that it's worth. So I'm sure there's a James Bond plot in there somewhere that had all the water supplies snaffled away somewhere on the black market. So these things are now, these things are not even into the future, but they're things that we're going to have to deal with, because for policing, what all of this means is possible mass migration. They're talking about 26 million migrants who will be having to move in the next 20 to 30 years. And again, I'm going to be really careful here because I'm going to start trampling into the next speaker, and I don't really want to do that. So anyway, we'll get away from Albie and keep going. The thing that, one of the things that's one of the pressing challenges at the moment for policing, and I'm sure this doesn't only extend to policing, is I just alluded to the fact that the workforce is changing, and our skills that we need within the workforce are evolving all of the time. But it's an interesting scenario, because our next generation of workers, everybody says, are going to be very different. Now, I'm sure if there's many of them amongst us today, they'll say, we're not different. But, they have grown up in a world that is very different. They're already very across all of this digital world that we are probably struggling to get our heads around. We could do a quick exercise around the room about who's maybe in the baby boomer kind of space. No one's going to admit it. Okay. All right. Gen Z then. How many Gen Zs have we got in the room? Born between 1996 and 2010. Yeah, we've got a few here. You're not that different, are you? But we are now at the point where we are getting a lot of Gen Zs into our workforce, and rightly so. I would argue they're looking for different things. They're not necessarily looking certainly towards policing as a job for life, and so we're all having to sort of think about, hang on, what is the next workforce for policing going to have to look like? How do we attract them? How do we make policing a career that people actually want to come into, even if it's not the career for life that many of us joined 20, 30 years ago? A certain commissioner, who I won't name, got himself into a bit of hot water for mentioning some of these things about Gen Zs needing a lot of feedback and needing a pat on the head every 5 days. But it wasn't me that gave him that information. I just want to let you all know. But these are the considerations we need to have. What are people looking for in their career choices? Where do people want to work? And this research pulled up. This was from Mission Australia, who surveyed a huge number of Gen Zs, and the environment was the number one. The environment was their number one choice or concern. There's some really depressing stuff in this as well about their mental health things, but in terms of looking at where we're going to try to attract the next generation into law enforcement, the environment was a massive question that they really wanted to know more about, in terms of how important do you think environment is, and where are the green credentials in terms of law enforcement. Homelessness, housing and crime and safety, pretty low. They didn't really sort of come upon their concerns at all, but I think that's probably because crime and things have probably been relatively stable throughout their 20 or so years. But certainly the environment, certainly equity and discrimination figured very heavily. So for any law enforcement to start having any cut through with Gen Zs, they've got to make sure that these are things that they take seriously and not just give it lip service, but actually genuinely embrace these kind of qualities within their how they present themselves, but also how they actually act and behave publicly. Things matter in terms of equity. People want to know that police will be treating everybody with respect and being equitable in terms of how they police people. They really care about public perception, and I think it would be fair to say that during COVID, police certainly lost some ground in terms of public trust, confidence, and depending on which state you happen to be in, how the COVID was policed. And if you look elsewhere overseas, Black Lives Matter and other things, and more recently, issues in the UK have lost us a lot of trust and confidence, and therefore we've got that to bump back from. If you look at the patterns around people leaving, and of course we had the Great Resignation and all of these things that we've talked about quite a lot previously, the big peak there in people leaving was during COVID. You'll notice that these are 23 figures. Things are starting to kick back up again about why people are leaving. But the top one, the green line there, is about the number of people leaving jobs because they, not necessarily because they want to. The purple line is people leaving because they want to. But there's also an upsurge at the minute of people being made redundant, which is pretty interesting. So whilst we've got this dearth of people available to employ, we've also got more people being made redundant or less people on full-time employment, which seems counterintuitive to me when I know it's really hard to recruit people at the moment. Policing is in a recruitment crisis, I think it would be fair to say. I will probably get shot for this, but they are all competing against each other. You know, you'll have all seen the adverts, come to Queensland, we'll give you $20,000 to come and move to Queensland and be a police officer in Queensland. And that's not making other states very happy, you know, because they're all competing against one another. And none are any better than any others. But that's only the tip of the iceberg because, you know, retention is also a massive issue. So there's a summit on in a couple of weeks' time. I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do there beyond everything that policing organisations are currently doing. But I think the long term is going to be really about looking really carefully about what your police force actually needs to look like into the future. You know, we've already looked at all the digitisation that's coming. Are we really going to need the same number of frontline officers, or are we going to need more nerdy backroom people who are never going to come through the front line of recruitment that we've got now? And it's going to need legislation change. It's going to need the unions and everyone to get on board, and it's going to need governments to stop putting parameters around we'll only pay for your police force if it's sworn officers. So not necessarily popular with everybody, but it's going to happen because we're going to have a different kind of police service to give the community the service that it needs and wants. This is it's a bit pasty, isn't it? But you're going to get the idea. We've got rising global tensions everywhere. You've all seen what's happened in the last couple of weeks. You know, I don't think any of us, well, as I say, there was a lot of conversations about failures of intelligence. I don't think anyone has seen the escalation of that coming so quickly in Palestine. We don't know what's coming next. You know, we've got wars that probably even 2 years ago none of us really saw coming, but they are having a knock-on effect across the world. And Australia will become more and more a destination of choice because we've been quite isolated from actual Darwin, I think, was the last time that there were, in World War II, was the last time there was any in-country hostilities against Australia. So this means for us, we are going to become, you know, a destination of choice for people trying to get out of conflict and war zones. So all of this kind of starts, you get the picture of the changing role for police. During COVID, there was a not so subtle shift about the expectations on police, and we've done a lot of work looking at role creep, for want of a better expression, and how things kind of in COVID were escalated in terms of the role creep. You talked earlier about, what police can and can't do when they turn up at domestic violence, for example. What's the alternates? Where's the other services? Where's the diversions that we can send people on if it's not something that should be dropping fairly and squarely into the law enforcement policing basket? And what we've found is that basically there has been a role creep, and police are picking up to 30% more of the duties that they weren't doing simply because no one else is there. It's not necessarily work that they should be doing. It's not the work that they're great at. They're not trained for it or equipped for it, but they're picking it up simply in the absence of any other service. We're seeing some states with 60% of their available crews, patrol crews, being taken up attending family domestic violence. You'll have all seen reports from the UK about their approach to pushing back on attending mental health calls for service. It's not as simple as that, and they're being very careful about what they're pushing back on, but having to say, we can't just keep doing everything. So where does policing duties start and stop? This is a lot of the work that we are looking at the moment, because there's a breaking point. And unless you're getting a lot more funding to do it, you can't just keep taking on more and more and more duties. And they're probably not the best service to do it anyway. But if you look at the change in role, you look at the increase of occasions of fire, flood, emergency response that's required. We've got Defence Force pushing back. We've got increasing numbers of calls for police to help. We've had numerous inquiries which has pushed more and more response onto police. Queensland have just got the SES amalgamated into Queensland Police. New South Wales have had to stand up an extra deputy to get involved in the resilient space. So all these things are kind of coming on, which are just going to amplify the pressures across scarce resources. And then at the other end of it, we can't recruit and retain people. So there is a bit of a crisis in terms of staffing and capacity for police to do their job at the moment. Like I say, I won't labour on all of this because I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder who's coming next, but we are seeing this real increase in demand, but expectation as well. And I mean, there may be some correlation between the fact that there's been an awful lot of ex-police chief commissioners who have done the reviews and think that the police should actually handle everything, and therefore put in their recommendations that more responsibility should go to police. But, that would be a bit of a leap. But again, how do police prepare themselves for the future to be the resilience and recovery, and particularly if we start getting mass migration from other countries because of these population booms and the fact that more and more of the world is becoming inhospitable. I mean, the Maldives, if you want to go on holiday to the Maldives, go quick, because they are going to be underwater by 2035, I think it is. No longer there. So, there's going to be a lot of people on the move, and are we ready to accept these people and make sure that our police services are, sufficiently staffed, sufficiently multilingual, sufficiently diverse to be able to police these new communities that we will inevitably get. I told you it was all depressing, didn't I? So when we did the climate change work, and like I said, I'll really whip through this because I don't want to talk about things, but it doesn't take a lot to start thinking about what happens with the escalation of climate change. And this is just a quick mapping that we did in the office, and you start looking at the things around the edges, where we've not got sufficient food, we've not got sufficient water, and the increasing demand upon not just law enforcement but the whole of society, really. Things blow out pretty quickly, and we're seeing it. If you've only got to look across Europe, what happened this summer, and you've got temperatures reaching levels that's not been seen ever, really. So it's not just here that we're struggling with all these problems. So how do we work forward with this? We can't just all hold our heads in our hands and crawl under the desk and wish that it wasn't happening. So we've got to start thinking about where we can work with others to move ourselves forward. And I mentioned trust and community trust, but also police have to find trusted partnerships, because we cannot deal with everything ourselves. Certainly in terms of the tech world, we don't have the skills, the capacity, the computing power. We can't even afford to buy it in, so we have to partner with trusted partners. But in that, as I mentioned earlier, it brings risk because you pick the wrong ones or you don't do the right assessments, and we've all seen how criticism can flow very, very quickly from that. So we've got to make sure that the people that we work with are aligned to our values and that they have the same intentions and work in a way that we are comfortable to work with them. You know, if we're looking at partnerships, it really needs to be embedded. We've got to work around our capacity and our capability and make sure that it's all very much about public value and bringing things together. I mean, there's been a lot of questions asked about who the police are sharing information with, whether or not they are exceeding their remit in terms of facial recognition and all those kind of technologies. But without them, we really aren't going to manage to stay on top of things. So it's a fine balance between really who do we trust, who do we work with, but where do we draw the line in terms of people's privacy being invaded. And I'm not a great fan of Amazon, but I do quite like this. They know what they're going to need even in 10 years from now. And I think you could say the same about what's going to be required from policing. People want to feel safe. They want to trust their police. They want a quick response from police as and when they need it. And they want it to be effective. So if we build our foundations around that, even if things are very different to what they currently are, we're not going to go too far wrong. So this is what police need to ask for themselves, you know, are we authorised? Do we have that trust? Are we still a legitimate police force? Do the community trust us to do that job? Do we have the capacity? That's questionable. Do we have the capability? Again, we've got to make sure we do, or we get it elsewhere, we share, we partnership, because if we don't, we're not going to have what we need to do our job in the future. And really, that's about it. Sorry, very depressing, but I think there is some silver linings.